The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
it's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, one and all. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Wednesday, the last day of summer. Give it up for fall, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited about cooling off here in the Northeast. And I know full well that it's probably going to be negative 15 degrees before I know it, and I'll be complaining about how cold it is. But it has been a hot ass summer, and I'm definitely looking forward to the winter. So tomorrow, actually this weekend, they say it's going to drop. The average temperature is going to drop like 20 degrees. So definitely looking forward to that. But anyway, Wednesday, September 21st, 2016. Thank you for joining us. Plenty of things happening in the news. Tonight, I'll be doing an interview with Professor Michael Ash of, we're going to be discussing a couple of things, basic income, the national debt, and the impact of the national debt on economic growth. So he'll be on at about 9:30 to discuss that. Of course, you can get some calls in if you want to join the conversation, 857-600-0518. I want to thank all of my patrons for making the show possible. Without you, it's not possible. I want to thank my newest patron, Rebecca G., who became a patron overnight. Thanks so much for your support. And if you want to support the Benjamin Dixon Show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the BPD show. All right. Now, all of that preliminaries out the way. Of course, there's the news. I want to talk about Keith Lamont Scott. I did not have Keith's name last night because the news was so breaking. It was so new that they had not yet released his name. But his name has been released, Keith Lamont Scott, and you can see him there with his wife, now his widow, Rakia Scott. He was sitting in his van waiting on his son. He's a father of 7, and he was waiting on his son to come home to pick him up from school, and a undercover police officer, plain clothes. The police, the Charlotte police, have stated that the officer had on a Charlotte Police Department vest, but he was in plain clothes. An African-American officer approached him and told him to put down a gun. The family of Mr. Scott has stated fervently and repeatedly that he did not have a gun, but the police have said otherwise, that he did have a gun. But most important out of everything else is the same thing that I mentioned last night, that they were not looking for Mr. Scott. They were not looking to to arrest him. He did not have a warrant. That was not their target. And somehow they went from looking for somebody else to killing the wrong person. Now, anyway, I'll leave the commentary for later. So now 7 kids are without their father, and the Charlotte Mecklenburg police chief has stated again and again that this was a gun and not a book. And so I don't know. Again, like I said last night, you have to believe that black people are just sitting around with guns waiting to shoot somebody for two weekends, like Friday and then Tuesday. You have police officers who randomly get the wrong person, but want to sell us the story that this random person that they weren't even looking for was violent as soon as they saw the police. That's kind of what you have to believe that a man who was sitting in his van, before he was approached by this police officer, he was minding his business. And you just have to believe that as soon as he saw the police officer and understood it to be a police officer, he pulled a gun. You know, that's not really, I can tell you as a black man, and this is, of course, that's just not how it works.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
That's not how it works. The same story was the story that they tried to use against Corey Jones in Palm Beach Gardens. My friend who was killed by the police officers, they made it seem that they just ran up on a black guy and he, got violent and pulled out his gun and they had to shoot him. Turns out that was not the case. And so at least Corey's murderer has been arrested. But we're still waiting evidence on Keith Lamont Scott. The officer who shot Mr. Scott did not have a body camera, but the other officers, 3 other officers who came to the scene, they did. They had body cams, and apparently there was a police cam. And so the officer involved is Officer Brentley Vinson. Again, he's an African-American man. He was undercover. That's, anyway, I don't, it's becoming too common. And I want people to understand that it is not always black people can just as easily be the tool for police brutality, just as easy as anyone else. Easily, right? The fact that the officer involved was black doesn't change anything, except for the fact that it was a black person who killed Keith Scott. The fact remains that they got the wrong person. They went after the wrong person, a man who was sitting there, even if he had a gun, right? If I own a gun and I'm legally licensed to carry that gun, and somebody runs up on me and they're not in a marked vehicle and they're not in a police uniform, I might pull a gun too. And the fact that the police officer got the wrong person means that he created the entire scenario, meaning he is culpable. He is responsible for the death of this man, no matter what happened afterwards, because you got the wrong guy. And I don't think people rarely, and the same thing that happened in Tulsa. This man's vehicle was broken down in the middle of the road. They were on their way to another call, and then they discovered there was a vehicle broken down on the road. They weren't even looking for him. Terrence Crutcher. They weren't even looking for him, but they ended up killing him because of a scenario that they created. They came onto the scene, they approached the wrong person, and the wrong person was killed. I'm kind of just taking my time with this because I want you to understand, had the police officers just kept going to their destination, 2 men would be alive right now today. One was a father of 4, the other one's a father of 7. They would be alive right now if those police officers had just kept going to their original destination. So the question is, at least in the case of Keith Lamont Scott, why did the police officer approach him in the first place? Has anybody answered that question? Can anybody answer? Why did this officer, this black officer, Brentley Vinson, why did he approach Keith Lamont Scott in the first place when he was not the subject of their investigation? And all they were doing was issuing or serving a warrant, right? So they're going to arrest somebody. It's not like they're going into they're not like they're going into a shootout. Right? They're not going onto the scene of a shooting. They're not going to responding to an officer down call. So why do you approach the situation like bats out of hell? Why would you approach the situation automatically creating a hostile environment that's going to lead to violence when you're serving a warrant? You're going to, what was the warrant for? Somebody tell me that. I haven't seen that. Was the warrant for, so was this guy wanted for murder? Because if the person they were going for was not considered to be armed and dangerous, then why in hell would Officer Brentley Vinson approach Keith Lamont Scott as though it was a hostile situation? They have to answer that question. Likewise, with Terrence Crutcher, why did that officer, that policewoman, approach him knowing that his vehicle had broken down? Why would she approach him and create a hostile environment that ultimately led to his death? Everybody wants to start the conversation in the middle of the conversation. With Terrence Crutcher, they want to know, did he put his hands down? No, go back to the beginning. Why was he, when he needed assistance, why was he approached with hostility and with guns drawn? And unless we start answering questions like that, we're always going to be chasing our tails, trying to understand why these situations went wrong. They went wrong when the police officers approached the scene. That's where it went wrong. So anyway, Officer Vinson has been put on administrative leave, obviously, pending the results of the investigation. Yeah. So another story that doesn't make these types of stories. Well, actually, before I do that, let's talk about the reaction, because there has been a lot of reaction from the people of Charlotte. The people of Charlotte have gone out, at least last night, with major protests. And there are some amazing pictures that have come out of Charlotte that you just have to see. I'll put some on your screen. There was a clash with police officers last night. Apparently some people were hurt and some police officers were hurt. And you could see the intensity of the situation. Tear gas was thrown. And you can see that the people of Charlotte are upset and hurt, and rightfully so. But this last picture, I believe should win some award because it really speaks volumes of the police there with tear gas in the air, their riot gear on, and a bus behind them that says "not in service." Because that's how most African Americans feel about the police agencies these days. They're not in service. They're not there to protect and serve our communities. And it feels like it's been that way for some time. All right, some more news out of St. Louis. So St. Louis police, a police officer has been charged with the 2011 murder of Anthony Lamar Smith. Officer Stockley has been charged with this. Jason Stockley has been charged with this murder recently, as in a few months ago. 4 months ago, actually, he was charged with the 2011 murder of a black man. And because of new evidence that came out between then and now, recently, video and audio from his police car surfaced saying that "I'm going to kill this mother effer. Don't you know it?" I don't know about that "don't you know it" thing. That don't you know it sounds like Sarah Palin. Like, don't you know? But I'm sorry, this is serious news. Sorry, guys. But he's been charged with murder. And now the most interesting thing about this is that video shows him placing a gun on the inside of the car that Anthony Lamar Smith was driving after he had killed him. So Jason Stockley shot 24-year-old Anthony Lamar Smith December. And so he shot him 4 times, killing him. After they took his body out of the car, video shows Stockley placing a weapon in the car. Investigators have discovered they investigated the gun itself, and DNA on the gun can only be tracked back to Stockley. Let me say that more accurately. There was none of Anthony Lamar Smith's DNA on that gun. The only DNA on the gun was belonged to Jason Stockley. Now, as this is information that came out today, as of today, they have not yet charged him with planting or whatever the official charge would be for planting evidence on the scene, but he has been charged with murder, and it just really would have gone unnoticed in a lot of ways, if not by the St. Louis Dispatch, Post-Dispatch, the newspaper that that obtained police and surveillance footage of what happened in 2011. And because of what they obtained, charges were filed. And because of what they obtained, they now see that this gun that had been blamed on Anthony Lamar Smith actually belonged to Jason Stockley, the man who's on your screen now. So this is this doesn't foster a lot of confidence with the police agencies. I mean, why, it's what was the case? The ACLU just brought a case, a civil rights lawsuit against the police department that got caught on video trying to find charges or make up charges to charge a young man. I mean, the case out of New Jersey where police officers brutally assaulted a black man and then charged him with the crime. And had it not been for the dash cam footage, they would have gotten away with it and he would have been in jail. I mean, there's so many cases where we see police officers go back to New York. The one I just covered a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, where the police officer is telling his supervisor that he is targeting the people who do crimes, yet the supervisor is telling him you should be looking for black youth males. And that's the exact phrase, black male youth, and blaming him and attacking him because he was not out racially profiling black male youths. So this is not something that people are just making up. This is a problem. It has been a problem for a long time. Let's just be realistic about it. It's not as though this is a brand new problem. It's just that technology has given us the opportunity to catch them in the act. And because some police officers aren't bright enough to cut off the cell phone that they confiscated and got caught themselves. But this type of thing has been happening. And I try to tell people all of the time, this doesn't just happen to black people. But because you have so many white Americans who are just vested in the idea of black criminality, they will do anything and everything to defend the police officers over and above what even happens to white people. Because it's not just happening to black people, it's happening to white people too. But it's being ignored by, I guess, White Lives Matter, and they're not going to go out and protest for the white people who are getting killed by the police, because if they do, then they have to admit that there's something wrong with the police. And the problem is that you have people who are police state activists. They are trying to alarm everyone and awaken everyone in America that we're living in a police state. But when it crosses over into the black community, they're like, oh no, that black guy did something wrong. He put his hands down. Or look, he didn't acquiesce to the demands of the police officer who had no reason to stop him in the first place. Right? They always end up falling on that side of the equation and not realizing that if there is a police state in America, it started first in the black community. And so now this story out of St. Louis is just another piece in the puzzle showing that there are reasons why African Americans don't trust the police. Let me show you this video right here. I'm going to end with this video. This is a video. I'm not even sure of where this is taking place, but you can watch the video. It's about 1 minute and 17 seconds long, but there are two police officers who are basically harassing some young black kids who are young enough to be my sons. And ultimately they let them go because they had no reason to be harassing them. Watch the video for yourself.
Come on, man. Come on, man. Come on, just talk to him and let him go, man. Come on. You don't need to do that, man. What you gonna? He got 5 felonies? Come on, man.
2007.
Look at this
These
shit,
kids
man.
born in 2007.
This shit enrages me, man.
And the guy
Look,
filming
let me just fall
is defending them.
Video this shit. I'm sorry. Yo, man, y'all didn't do nothing. Matter of fact, don't say nothing. You don't got to say nothing till your mom come. That's your right. You ain't got to say nothing. Come on, man. Like for real, they ain't did nothing. Let them go. God
And then he
damn,
lets
man,
them go.
let them go. They ain't did nothing. They babies, man.
And who said they did anything?
All right, but you taking the names
How
down
we
on
running
it.
them? Did we run them yet?
Yo, bro.
You know what's going on, sir?
Yeah, what's going on?
I just explained to you we have serious problems down
All
there.
right, well then you catch the perpetrators. You leave them children alone. Leave them
But
children
they are
alone.
juveniles.
Come on, man. Leave them children. If you catch somebody in the act, then you do that shit. Leave them little boys alone, man.
I mean, these are literally kids, children on bikes being stopped by the police, getting their names, getting their information. It had not been for the guy they're filming standing up for them, then they probably would have ran their names and possibly even cuffed them just cause. And then ultimately, you know, they did nothing wrong because the police officers let them go without even stopping them, without arresting them, without even detaining them. And it starts so early. It starts so young. It starts at the point where, you know, anyway, 857-600-0518. I want to get you guys in on the conversation. I have a time for at least 1 or 2 calls before I start the interview with Professor Michael Ash. We're going to be shifting gears hard and discussing economics and basic income, things of that nature. But I want to know what you think. Like, is there, you know, give me a reason we should trust the police at this point. I mean, I know clearly it's not all police officers, right? I shouldn't even have to give that disclaimer. We know it is not all police officers, but when you run into this and you run into it at such an early age and you have this type of encounter with the police, and then you see it happening more and more and more because technology is allowing it to be seen, it becomes more and more problematic, becomes even more difficult to trust. I mean, this guy was literally sitting in his van and he was not the target. Keith Scott was not the target. He was not the person with the warrant, and sitting in his van ends up dead. I don't know. But that's where we are. All right. So we're going to shift gears and talk a little economics. And before I do, before I bring on Professor Ash, let me talk about Bill Clinton. This would be a good segue into the conversation. So Bill Clinton today was discussing the TPP, and he was discussing supporting lower corporate taxes. And he also, this according to CNBC, it was an interview with CNBC. He stated that he understood the geopolitical, quote unquote, geopolitical reasoning behind the TPP. And he made great pains to make it clear that this was his opinion and not something that could be attributed to, then he cut it off. But obviously we could assume he was talking about his wife, Hillary Clinton. But he gives he gives his explanation of why he understands the reasoning behind TPP, because we want to compete with China, right? That's pretty much his explanation. But so he's calling for a lower tax rate, and he said, quote, "I think it should be lowered. This is just me, and I'm not speaking for obviously Hillary Clinton." And so the current tax rate is about 5% higher than other nations globally. The effective tax rate, though, which allows for a lot of loopholes, really essentially, actually, let me take a step back. He's advocating for a lower tax rate But we've seen scenarios that no matter how low we take taxes, you have corporations who are going to do everything they can to avoid paying them, no matter how low. And he was talking about, President Clinton in this interview was talking about, he alluded to the George W. Bush tax holiday, where they were able to bring back their, repatriate their profits and bring them back at a tax rate, I believe, of about 5%, 5% back in 2004. And with the caveat that they would invest the funds and that they would hire and with all these things. So you had companies who brought back this money, and the majority of them who brought them back did not do what they were supposed to do with the money, which was do things that is going to stimulate the economy. You know, invest in yourself, invest in your company, hire people. What they did instead was they bought back their stock. And so President Clinton, while alluding to this tax holiday, said again, basically the same thing the 2004 holiday was supposed to do, which was to force them to invest domestically, force them to invest in their companies and to hire people. The problem is that we've done that. We've tried that. And even at 5% of a tax holiday, you still had companies who did not repatriate their funds. They would have rather kept their funds somewhere where they pay no taxes than to bring back their taxes at 5%. Excuse me, pardon me. So, and if we take the case of Apple, for example, in Ireland, paying, what was it, 50 euros on $1 million worth of taxes. And, you know, we're not going to compete with that level of taxation. We can't. So this idea of lowering corporate taxes, while it may make sense on paper, the reality of it is that we're in a race to the bottom. We're in the race to the bottom in a global economy where where companies can chase around the globe to find the lowest rate they possibly can. And ultimately, it's not that they want to pay a lower rate. They don't want to pay any taxes. So Bill Clinton stating this at the Global Initiative, Clinton Global Initiative, basically saying that he supports lower taxes and he understands the reasoning behind the TPP. But here's the thing. I have no reason to believe that this is not the exact same belief of Hillary Clinton. I mean, me and my wife, we're not too far apart on what we believe. Not that that's a good example because, you know, I'm not a former president and she's not a former Secretary of State. But, you know, Hillary Clinton actually helped Bill write well, not right, but she advocated for the TPP. And it's only recently that she has become an opponent of the TPP. And now Bill Clinton is doing what Bill Clinton does, which is messes up her game. And now he's saying that he understands. He's opening the small window of justification for the TPP. And I believe Hillary's going to run through the gate with it. I think we're going to have the TPP if President Obama is not able to get it passed during his lame duck session. I guarantee you, I will put money on it today that Hillary Clinton will sign the TPP in her first term. All right, let's take this first caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
And it's PJ from North Carolina. I don't call too much anymore, but I still listen as much as I can. Would you forgive me if I brought up police again, but really briefly? It won't be a long thing. It's more of a question.
Sure, go for it.
Jimmy Dore, who's on the Young Turks and also has his own show, a progressive broadcaster. You should look him up if you don't know.
Yeah, I know Jimmy.
He brought up a point that a bit hyperbolic, but I don't want to say I agree, but so far he has me thinking. He said that he characterizes police as liars and criminals because of their killing and stuff, like extrajudicial killing and their constant covering up and lying and whatnot. And in particular, he said that every time there is a controversial shooting, the police statement is always a lie, like without question. There's always something fabricated, made up, a mischaracterization.
Yeah.
And I personally get that, I know that not every police institution or every police precinct is full of corruption from the top to bottom.
Right.
I know that good news doesn't really generate a lot of heat, so it's not up all the time. But
Right.
has there ever been a case, as far as you know, or anyone, like if this becomes a clip or whatever, that has there ever been a case where there was a controversial shooting where someone seemed to have been killed wrongly, but the police statement turned out to be true once like video evidence showed up? Has that ever been the case? Because as far as I know, ever since all of these concert riots and protests have been starting, the police have always been wrong with what they initially say.
Yeah. So that first statement, now, I guess it could fall in the category of the eye of the beholder, right? In terms of video, because I've had people look at the same exact video and completely disagree about what we see. Now, notwithstanding that phenomenon, I have run into many occasions where that initial statement by police officers had to be adjusted. And so it's almost to the point where police officers need to not give that initial statement, because look at the video that I put together of the spokeswoman from Tulsa. Her statement, word for word, was wrong, like outright lies, just completely wrong.
Everything except the tasering part, yeah.
Except the tasering part. Everything except for that was completely wrong, especially when you put it side by side with the dash cam footage of what happened. And so, I'm with you, and I'm sure there is an example. I'm quite sure we're going to find an example, but it doesn't come to me right now. And I saw Max pulled out his laptop, so maybe he's looking that up. I don't know. No, he said no.
Yeah. So I just want to leave with the statement that, obviously not all cops are terrible, but part of their function in society to be trusted as the people who allegedly protect and serve is that they have to convince people that they protect and serve.
Yeah.
So when you get to the point where some state judiciary says that it's pretty much justified for black people to run from cops because of the stigma and the stuff that happens.
Yeah.
When it gets to that point, the police have to look at themselves. The Blue Lives Matter people have to look at themselves.
Yeah.
That's all that has to be said.
Hey, thanks for that, man. Listen, and yeah, actually, I meant to cover that, so maybe I'll do that in the bonus show. But the the highest court in Massachusetts has declared that it is reasonable for black people to, they said, walk away from the police, as in to avoid the police.
More and more probably.
But we interpret that to mean to run, because of the likelihood of being racially profiled. It makes sense to and it was a unanimous decision here in Massachusetts, an amazing decision. I have to read the entire thing, but a unanimous decision that it makes sense for black people to walk away, to avoid the police, because of the amount of racial profiling that occurs. All right, awesome. So I've been joined by Professor Michael Ash. Let me make some adjustments here. And Professor Ash is the professor of economics and public policy at UMass and Amherst, and he's also the chair of the Department of Economics. He is a PhD. He has a PhD from University of California in Berkeley, and he is I have been trying to connect. Let me start that sentence again. I've been trying to connect with him for some time, and he's been so patient and so flexible that I'm excited to have him on today. Professor Michael, how are you today?
Hi, Ben. I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's really an honor to be here. Thanks.
My pleasure. I'm glad that we could connect. And if you would, before we jump into the conversation, because we want to talk about basic income, and I want to talk about one of the papers that you wrote. But just tell us a little bit about what you study and some of your fields of expertise.
Thanks. So actually I've been enjoying the show this evening, or enjoying is not the right word for it. I've been very disturbed by the show. I do a lot of work on equity and justice in the economy in the United States. So I'm especially interested in environmental justice. That's how the bads in the environment and the goods in the environment don't get equally shared. So that's something I spend a lot of time on. I'm also interested in the work that workers do and how much they get paid for it, and why what workers have been paid has been slipping over the last 40 years. Basically over, it's not even my adult life, my entire life, there's been enormous slippage in the well-being of workers in the U.S. And I'm interested in understanding why that's happened, and maybe more importantly, what can be done about it.
Okay, so we just added something else to our conversation tonight. I definitely want to talk about that, about the some of the efficiencies that we see. The labor market is more efficient, but the gains from that efficiency that we don't realize. It's going in terms of profits, but it's not going to labor. And it sounds like this is some within of your realm of study, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes, that's right. That's something I'm very interested in. I think it actually ties quite closely to basic income guarantee, to the idea of a basic income. So we can maybe connect those. I mean, one of the reasons for a basic income is for workers to take back some of their own. The economy is enormously more productive than it used to be. You described it as more efficiency in the labor market. We get a lot out of more out of every hour of work by a lot than we did in, say, 1975. And it's really quite amazing that workers are not taking home a lot more than they took home in 1975.
All right, so
despite
let's take a second here to define. I think when we say basic income, some people may not even know what we're talking about. How would you define for just the average listener what basic income is?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So a basic income means that the state or some collective that we produce that we create will send a basic amount of money to every person, every woman, man, child in the country on an annual basis, and all they have to do is be themselves. They don't have to work for that. They don't have to. They don't have to demonstrate that they are deserving or meritorious. It's simply an income that you receive to defray some of the costs of cost of living. It's an idea that's been around for a pretty long time. It actually has American roots. Tom Paine, the revolutionary, the revolutionary at the time of the American Revolution, the real revolutionary, was in favor of a guaranteed basic income. And again, the idea was just that to be a full participant in our society, you need some income to start with, and you should have that income whether you do something that a capitalist wants to pay you for or not. It's just something that you have a right to, and that enables you to be a full participant. So, we could talk about amounts. People might get their sort of head wrapped around it. I think a basic income that we could start thinking about is, that I think is actually on the table in some places, is, thinking about maybe $4,000 to $10,000. Somewhere between $4,000 and $10,000 per person per year. So if you had a family of four, you'd be talking about a before work income of something on the order of say $15,000 to $40,000. Higher amounts would cost. You have to think about where that comes from.
Yeah. Wow. So let's unpack the implications that has, right? So I remember in undergrad, I think I was a freshman in college in my basic economics, macroeconomics. I remember being after class and just sitting there thinking, I'm like, why don't we invest a block amount of money into a person as soon as they're born into American citizen? Why don't we put money into their hands or into some type of account? Because money that the government spends is obviously going to be spent and stimulate the economy. So, just from that one single thought, I've kind of been following this conversation on basic income that really hasn't gone very far, because we hit this hiccup of the fear of socialism and the fear of communism and the fear of a welfare state. And so I know that's more on the political side of it, but just in terms of your vantage point, How is this not, or how could we convince people that this is beneficial economically and not just something that's a welfare state that's going to crush our economy?
Right. Well, actually, let me just mention with respect to the politics, basic income has a funny following. It certainly has a following on the left, and people would like to see a fairer society, frankly, a more socialist society. But it also has a pretty long-standing subscribership on the right. So two big advocates of basic income, and this may come, I found this somewhere between shocking and amusing, were Milton Friedman and Frederick Hayek, who are kind of godparents on the American economic right. Their image of it is that it would replace, and I think this is a bad idea, but I'm just describing their image, that would replace means-tested welfare support or specific subsidies for particular needs, like subsidized housing or subsidized food with food stamps. So, in their more generous moments, and there weren't very many, but in their more generous moments, they were in favor of just sending poor people what they need most, which is money. So this actually has kind of funny, as I said, there's kind of funny subscribership. I want to back off that now and talk about more kind of what life would look like with the basic income guarantee. And from my perspective, one of the big attractions is that it would free people from the tyranny of bad work, which is just a terrible use of people's lives. People could be much more choosy about what work they do. I think it would put a lot of pressure on employers to make work engaging and interesting, and that I think a lot of good might come out of it. It might actually spur a lot of growth in the economy. You already mentioned, I think you were absolutely on target, that this would be highly stimulative for an economy that has really been in the doldrums. I mean, and one of the main reasons is that lots of working households just don't have enough money to spend.
Right.
So this would be highly stimulative at a time when we need it.
I have to definitely go back and find Friedman and Hayek actually advocating for basic income. I have Hayek's The Road to Feudalism on my desk right now, and I have to see if he, where did he make that quantum leap? I have to go see it, but I'll take your word for it. I obviously believe you on it. So it can be stimulative. Do you see it as a solution to poverty? And that's a big question. Yeah.
So that's a good question. So I think that poverty is one of the areas where it might be most effective. I don't think it's a solution to inequality, and we should come back to that. Okay. I think it's an important step, but it might be a solution to poverty because it simply puts in the pocket of everybody in the country, regardless of, again, being deserving poor or the amount of work that they do. It puts enough to pay the basic bills. I guess if we choose an amount large enough, it's enough to pay the basic bills in the pockets of every household in the country. And that's a pretty big step towards overcoming the kind of fundamentals of deprivation of genuine poverty. Might not be enough to tackle the kind of inequality we've been seeing, but poverty, I think it's a really good, it is a really good potential step.
So would you, do you think if we couldn't fix inequality, would it be sufficient for us to just fix poverty?
In my opinion, no. The amount of inequality that we've seen, the pace at which it's grown over the last, really since about 1978, 1980, is really extraordinary. And it upsets so many other, the inequality upsets so many other balances. Political balance is completely disrupted by the massive growth of the wealth of what the French economist Thomas Piketty labeled the 1%. So I don't think it's enough to confront poverty. But let's come back to basic income, which I think is a good first step in that direction. We could hold it up against some alternatives, and I guess I'm kind of excited about it as a piece of a larger. Maybe a piece of a larger set of solutions that would help on poverty, that might help on certain parts of inequality, even if it wouldn't be quite the same as reining in the extraordinary growth at the high end of the income distribution. So again, for your viewers, I would say, well, we could think about this basic income guarantee. There are other approaches. So, for example, we could think about minimum wages or living wages. Those are intended, obviously, for people who are working. It's a wage for work, but it's raising that wage until it's at a level that generates an income that's adequate for the worker's family or household to survive on. These are not mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to be, well, are you for a basic income or are you for a living wage? It can absolutely be both as a piece of increasing the well-being of working families.
Okay, so let's go to I just kind of want to go to some extreme logical, the extreme logical conclusion of some of these thoughts. Let's say we did get a basic income that, depending on where you live, could guarantee enough money for everyone to have housing. What do you see that? What would that do to like the housing market? Will there be enough homes? And I'm just asking this because this is, I kind of know the answer, but I want to know what you think on the logical extreme of that.
No, it's a great question. So you might be worried, what happens if, will there be too much money chasing too few goods? I'm not worried about that. Our economy has been massively productive and pay hasn't gone up very much. There's a lot of room in this economy for working families to have more money, more income to chase goods with. It is possible to imagine a situation where people have so much money that we start to hit the limits of what the economy can produce. But our economy is producing about 2.5 times what it produced the year I was born, and workers are making about the same amount. So there's really no shortage of goods in the economy. There's really kind of a shortage of purchasing power for working households. Basic income would be a good way to boost that right off the bat. And I think if people had money for housing, for healthcare, for their necessities, it would be very, that would just be a very good thing. And markets are, at least under the current configuration, would be able to provide those if workers were showing up with more money in their pockets, more money in their wallets to make those purchases.
Yeah. No, and it almost seems like common sense. In the sense that, especially the middle class, we're consumers. We're going to spend that money that comes in. It just basically ensures that we don't have to live in poverty or that we don't have to be homeless. But essentially, it's still going to be spent. I mean, this would be a windfall for capitalists. But it seems as though capitalists may be. Why would capitalists not be in favor of this? That's the question.
So there are a couple of angles to this. So one is that capitalists like having workers who can't be that picky or choosy about the jobs that they take. And to be honest, what I say is one of the benefits of a basic income guarantee is that will allow working people to be a little bit pickier about the jobs they agree to do. So jobs where the hours are abusive, either because there are too many hours or too few hours or not hours when or hours that you can't control that get adjusted, with half hour before the shift is going to begin. There's a lot of misuse of workers, abuse of workers in that domain. So employers, to be honest, kind of like having desperate employees in some in a bunch of ways. So employers may be a little bit reluctant to not have workers who are looking starvation in the face, and a basic income would relieve workers of that burden, of that basic kind of terror or fear of not subsisting. So I think in the long run, that's going to lead to jobs that are much more creative, that make much better use of our full capacity as human beings. But in the short run, it would be a big shift in the balance of power, I believe, between employers and employees. Big shift towards employees who could be much pickier, even to have a buffer to, for example, strike on, right? That one of the reasons that the playing field is not level between workers and employers is because workers, have to pay rent and pay groceries. It's very frightening to say, I'm going to withhold my work in the context of the strike. Something like a basic income guarantee would give a little bit more slack in the life of a worker, a little bit more cushion to live on, and would allow them to act collectively and advocate for themselves. And again, not take really not be forced to take really terrible or abusive jobs. So that would shift the balance. I mean, I don't think the thing that I joked about. I wasn't joking. Milton Friedman did come out in favor of something like a basic income guarantee. I think this will only emerge from a political struggle at this point, that workers will have to push very hard for this. That's why I think it's important to think about the range of alternatives. Why I mentioned living wages as a complementary alternative. There's more than one way to manage. There's more than one approach that we could take towards addressing poverty and evening out some of the inequalities that have developed.
So the other side of the equation, and I think this dovetails perfectly into some of your research, is the cost, right? So I'm looking at an estimate here that if we went with a basic income of about $10,000 per adult, that would equate to $2.47 trillion annually. So there's always a question of how do we pay for this, and why would we pay for this if we had to pay for this with deficit spending, ultimately adding to our debt, which leads to one of your articles that I found fascinating, which was discussing does high public debt consistently stifle economic growth? So talk about the debt portion, and if it is financed with debt, is it something that we should just completely avoid?
Sure, that's a great question. Let me say a couple things about financing basic income, and I'd be happy to move on and talk a little bit about public debt. So where is this money going to come from? So the numbers, $2.5 trillion sounds like an enormous amount of money. We actually live in a very, very prosperous economy. I mean, what's remarkable is how much stuff the economy, how much goods and services the economy produces every year, and how little of that has accrued to working people in recent years. So there's a lot of room. This is not really demanding debt or deficit. It's really demanding a more equitable distribution of a growing product. So that's one remark. Okay. Second remark, I think this is really worth thinking about. One of the most successful existing basic income guarantees, it's not on the scale that we're talking about, it's about one-tenth the size, is that the state of Alaska operates what's called the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is a payment on the order of slightly more than $1,000 per person, again, per man and child. So if you had a family of four, you receive about a $4,000 annual payment from the state of Alaska if you live in Alaska. And that money is a piece of the royalties on Alaska's oil revenue. So it's, from the sale of a natural asset, a piece of that is given to Alaskans just for being Alaskan. You don't have to work. It's not payment for a service rendered. It's a claim that Alaskans have on the massive natural bounty of Alaskan producing oil. Oil has other problems. We can talk about that some other time. But there are ways that universal basic income could be funded as a natural asset dividend. So, for example, we could introduce carbon taxation, which would probably be very helpful. Unlike the oil fund in Alaska, carbon taxation might be very helpful for constraining climate change. But it's also going to create a large pot of money. And you can see companies are already sharpening their knives, thinking that they might get a slice of that for themselves. Well, another thing that could be done with that pot of money is it could become the revenue base for a basic income. It could be distributed again to people just for being people, and it would make this potentially enormous contribution to family well-being. So that kind of carbon tax revenue recycling could be a revenue source for a basic income guarantee. So I just throw that out there as a way to think about maybe doing this without incurring any deficits or debt. But you did ask about deficit and debt, and that is an area where I've done research. I guess I come from a basically Keynesian perspective that it's actually very important for governments to run to run deficits and thereby increase their debt when the economy is slack. And to my mind, our economy remains very slack. Right. I think it was, we had a disaster in 2008 over the last 8 years or so. But even before that, we were running an economy that was just too slack. And you can see that in high youth unemployment rates, pockets of unemployment, in parts of the country that have chronically high unemployment, parts of our cities that have chronically high unemployment. We could simply run a much hotter economy. We'd have to run deficits to do it, but we would grow very quickly. And my prediction is that the debt would not grow that fast relative to GDP, because we'd be putting more people to work, would be creating incentives for companies to increase productivity. So we could run deficits, we could run the economy much tighter, many more people employed, without much of an impact on debt. I'll pause.
And much of the impact in terms of debt, or debt to GDP ratio, or debt generally?
So I'm referring here to public debt as a fraction of GDP.
Okay.
And so I think that's, so I wrote this paper with a student and with a colleague, in which we rebutted sort of terrible scare stories about public debt to GDP, and how if that goes just a little bit too high, it's going to crush growth. So we rebutted that case, and the student found, our student Thomas Herndon found some very serious mistakes in a paper that had kind of generated the scare of public debt. That said, I do not believe that public debt can rise infinitely and endlessly. I think that it's important to think about how big public debt becomes. It's important to think about what the public debt is run up for. So if we're running up a public debt because we're educating people better, because we're taking care of our health, and that's going to pay because we're rebuilding bridges and roads, or even better, building a green infrastructure or a smart energy grid, that is debt that is wisely taken on. That's not a problem. That's easily going to pay for itself. If it's public debt that we run up building up a war machine or something like that, or giving really large tax cuts to rich people, that's not a sensible public debt. That's probably a bad idea to take it on, even if it doesn't create an enormous drag, which is really, I guess, what our paper discovered, is that you do not get an enormous drag from public debt. There's no disaster level. It's not a number we really have to keep our eye on very carefully. We really want to think about things that matter a lot, like the wages of working people, what's the unemployment rate, what's the hidden unemployment rate, can we stimulate more growth?
So if I could dare try to summarize here, you're saying so long as we're spending on things that will drive GDP growth, relative to our level of debt, it's not something that we have to be fearful of, that debt, that investment that we're making via the debt is actually something that's going to continue to help the economy grow. That's the first thing that I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And the way out of big public debt problems in just historical case after historical case has been getting the economy back on track. And by on track, I don't mean 2005 and 6 before the Great Crash. I mean, the Great Crash was terrible, but I mean really back on track, the kind of across the board income growth that we saw in the period from the end of World War II until the early 70s. That's the kind of backtrack I mean.
Yeah. And so you've actually also answered all the questions that we literally had lined up for you, because you talked about the type of, that was my question, the type of spending that we use this debt for. If we're investing in human capital, if we're investing in infrastructure, it has a more stimulative effect than if we were investing in tax breaks for people who may not even spend that, or they may just accrue that wealth and sit it aside. So how we spend it matters.
The evidence is extraordinarily strong, particularly at the moment, thinking about education, thinking about health, maybe thinking about the climate and the environment more than anything else. If we spend on those things, there's going to be a lot of employment. There's really, the economy will grow. There will be an enormous amount of employment. We'll need to invest in those things if we're going to survive, if our climate's going to survive over the next 50 or 100 years. with our civilization intact. There will be plenty of jobs if we can steer investment, towards building a sustainable economy, through education, through health. And right now, I think we really need to worry a lot about investing in climate in fair ways.
And then the last thing before I let you go was talking about you already answered it, but I just want to bring light to it again, that this is not to say that debt can just grow out of control. It's that our current ratio, and in your paper, the ratio is at 90%. Our debt to GDP ratio is at about 90%. That's not a terrifying level, but you're saying it can't just go infinitely higher. So where would that threshold be? Where do you think, where is the danger zone for that ratio?
So there is no threshold. We're not going to walk off a cliff one day and find out, shouldn't have borrowed that last dollar, off the cliff. I think that we want to make sure that ratio is not growing, out of control over a long time. Again, the best way to get that done is to stimulate the economy and to get denominator, right? So it's public debt divided by GDP. Yeah. We need to make the denominator bigger, and don't worry, the public debt will take care of itself. So I absolutely would not point to a number. At the moment we're at a public debt to GDP ratio that is large but not unheard of by historic standards. It's substantially below the level at the end of World War II, which was a very high level of public debt to GDP. And it was at the beginning of a period of enormous growth and success for the American economy, and a growth and success enjoyed across the income distribution by rich and poor alike. So I just think it's not an indicator that I think we should be focusing on very much. I think it will effectively take care of itself if we are taking care of our economy well.
Awesome. And I guess I have to dovetail this and put a ribbon around it. Would you consider basic income being the type of debt that is stimulative enough to continue to push the economic growth to sustain that high level of debt?
Yeah, so certainly to sustain a high level of growth. So certainly in the short run, our economy is running, I think continues to run quite slack. I think some basic income would be beneficial in terms of stimulating income. I think in the longer run, the idea of basic income really is more about kind of our values as people, and the kind of jobs that we want to be working in. The idea that we want to put pressure on employers to offer better jobs than they have been. The idea that we want to free people from the tyranny of bad work. I think most people would like to work and would like to work at interesting jobs that kind of make full use of our capacities as human beings. Yeah. Probably not as many hours as many people work. So I think that again, basic income guarantee could be combined with thinking about reducing the work week, combined with living wages for work well done. I think it's definitely a piece of that puzzle. It will be stimulative, again, because working households are much more hand to mouth. So when that basic income comes in, it will get spent at the butcher and the baker, and help put the butcher and baker to work as well. So I think it can play a piece. It can play a piece in that. I do think we also need to think about what's the sustainable basis for it. I don't necessarily think it should be debt funded over long. Yeah. In the short run, debt funded is great. I mean, when you need to stimulate a sagging economy.
Awesome. Professor Michael Ash, who's the chair of the Department of Economics at UMass Amherst and the professor of economics and public policy, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation, even on the backside of all the terrible things we had to talk about at the beginning of the show. It's good to actually talk about some things that actually can push progress forward. Would you tell everyone how they can get up with you, whether it's Twitter or social media? What's the best way for anyone who wants to have this type of conversation to get up with you?
Thanks. So I am on Twitter. I think at UMass Econ is the best way to reach me, or the easiest one to say on the air.
Okay.
My personal handle is too long. So at UMass Econ is my Twitter handle. I'm listed in the department at UMass Amherst Econ. I welcome emails. Please don't hesitate to write. Last, let me put in a plug for my corporate environmental performance rankings, which is toxic100.org, toxic100.org, and you can see work that my colleagues and I have done on rating companies in how much toxics expose us to through air pollution and how that's divided between the rich and the poor and disproportionately affects people of color.
Absolutely. That's so that's Toxic 100, and it takes me to the Political Economy Research Institute over there at UMass at Amherst. So toxic100.org.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's
awesome.
right.
All right, Professor. Thanks again for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and we definitely have to do it again.
Thank you for having me on. It was really an honor. And it was a pleasure.
Awesome. All right, folks, thanks so much for joining us. That's the end of the show. I think it was a great conversation. The first time we talked about basic income on the show, but it's something that we'll probably talk about a little bit more each and every week, because we're not just doing journalism in a way. We're doing some type of, well, anyway, I'll stop there. Good night.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.